with a good friend and brother. And I think, oh, you're about to get mad, Shane. Is this your first time on
This is
Java?
my, I watch it, but I've not been a guest.
So for over 3 years, I have attempted text, email, called, seen in person, shamed like I'm doing now, and we finally get to old school MacBook. All right, I think we are all set there. All right, Attorney Curry.
Okay.
So we're here at the Health Equity Compact. Had a little technical difficulties, but I was checking in with you on how you're doing. Just catch us up real quick, so now that they can hear you.
Yeah, no, I was saying that I think anyone who does this work of activism, as we refer to as woke across the country, it means that you're up late, up late, up early, stressing over the things that most citizens can operate and live their lives and not necessarily think about. But when you're conscious of the issues, it is a toll that it takes on you. It probably means you're missing a football game with your kids.
Yep.
Or basketball game. It probably means that instead of watching your favorite TV show, you're trying to read a report in an evening. So, I said at the beginning of the Health Equity Summit today that I'm glad so many people are woke and others are waking up, but some of us are insomniacs.
Absolutely.
Boston is very fortunate, I dare say blessed, to have a lot of insomniacs, people who are fighting for housing, for communities that are disparately unhoused, or body cameras, as Shagun Idowu, my good friend, did when he was at the Boston Camera Action Team, and the Boston NAACP worked with him. I had the honor of working with him on that. There are a lot of insomniacs that we take for granted.
Yep.
Health equity is one of those. We have a lot of insomniacs in this room today who've been fighting for health equity and against health disparities way before George Floyd, way before COVID-19, and they were ignored. They didn't get funded. They may have lost a job because they were staunch advocates. They were the skunks at the party, I say. And now truth is catching up to history.
Truth is catching up to history. So truth catching up to history is probably a reason and a catalyst and everything that comes with that for this health equity compact. Why the health equity compact? Why the summit today? And why a focus on health equity? Is health, isn't it equitable right now?
Yeah, so it's not.
Oh,
so
really?
I have to tell you. So, you know, I always start with the researcher, Dr. Geronimus, as an example. In 1990, she did a research on women's fertility. And the traditional belief back in 1990 was that Black women had poor outcomes from pregnancies and their babies died because Black women were having babies too young. And if you remember back in our youth, it was all these campaigns aimed at the Black community against teenage pregnancy as a strategy to prevent those poor outcomes. What her research found when she did her research on a large group of women was that actually the healthiest babies were the teenage Black babies because in that age, their bodies and their circumstances hadn't been impacted by the weathering, she called it, of racism, poverty, food insecurity, all those things. And that the older they got compared to white women, 20s and 30s and 40s, those Black women's pregnancies became more risky. And she coined the phrase weathering, which means you become weathered, impacted by all these societal conditions. So that's true, not just in maternal health, that's true in cancer, heart disease, hypertension, mental health, substance use disorder, your teeth, your eyes. So I use another example to your point about health equity and why it's important of asthma. I had asthma, my sister had asthma, mother had asthma. And in this conversation around weathering, I was introduced to it by Healthcare for All. They said, we're gonna use asthma. A study asked Black women to rate their kids' asthma from 1 to 10. Many of those mothers rated the kids' asthma 3s and 4s, probably like my mother would have. And then the doctors evaluated those same kids and they were 8, 9s, and 10s. And they said, that's weathering. That you can get so used to taking the Alupent and Flovent like I did 3 or 4 times a day. You can get so used to missing gym, not going to work like my mother did or we did in school. And you can get so used to sitting in the emergency room like we did at Boston City Hospital as kids, once a month, once a quarter, that you become weathered to being sick. So I say this to you because I know you've been a staunch advocate on this. I asked the question, so what are we weathered to?
What are we
weathered to? The fact that we can't send our kids to the park because there's shootings in our neighborhood, that our murders don't get solved, that too many of our uncles and auntie them die of almost every disease we can name in their 40s and 50s and 60s, living 10, 15, 20 years less
23
than
according
white
to the latest
Bostonians, Massachusetts folks, or United States citizens. Are we weathered to the fact that we're not in the C-suite, the medical schools, the law schools, which then sort of props up the white supremacist notion that we're not there because we don't belong there, because you didn't study hard enough, because you don't care about eating right. That's why you're unhealthy. What we're realizing was that history matters. The taint of history and how we provide access to resources and how we've excluded and marginalized people produces the bad health outcomes that we see today. So to your question,
yes, sir.
This summit is a health equity summit because now insomniacs, people who have positions of power in health and business and philanthropy, have come together. And what we call a health equity compact. And I jokingly say among audiences when I speak to women, and I say if women ran everything, we wouldn't have a maternal health crisis in this country.
And if women ran everything, we probably wouldn't have a whole lot of crisis.
We wouldn't have war, right? Because people would negotiate and find solutions to things in ways that men, and in this case, what we find across the country is that men, particularly white men, deprioritize women's health issues.
And that's women, period, not to do with race or just
women, period, which is why maternal health outcomes are a problem across all races.
Well, it's obvious maternal health outcomes. And then the fact that the men are also trying to prioritize how women and what decisions women can make with their bodies. And we know that a majority of that tends to be white men that are doing that. And so,
and I want to make this point when I say about even white men, that's not a personal thing, right? That's about power, privilege.
And you said history. It's just a historical context there too. You know, so that is absolutely real. I know we don't have that much time. We got a couple of other folks that are coming in. This is why, you know, it's important to get you booked like, you know, at least once a year,
I'll be back.
Attorney Curry. But before we get ready to go, I've asked the folks that have been on Attorney General Campbell, Rasan Hall was with us.
Good.
We've been doing this piece around the healing tour. We went to Roxbury, we're in Dorchester tomorrow, Mattapan and Hyde Park. You talked about violence. Can you talk about healing? What does healing mean to you, and how do we begin to heal as a community? You can talk from a health perspective based on the impact of the social determinants of health. You talked a little bit about violence. You can talk from a perspective of as a Black man, and we may not deal with our emotions. Talk to me about healing as we wrap up.
So I would say when I think about healing, one is in a personal story. So I've lost two nephews to murder. Had a nephew murdered in Mattapan in the prime of their life. I have an aunt murdered. And when I think about healing in our community, and healing even from a racial justice perspective, starts with the truth, right? Some validation
that you will know
that crime and violence in your neighborhood is not acceptable is a truth that I may need to heal. Yeah. That we should have solved for that violence. We should have prevented that murder in your family. We should have not relegated you to poverty and treated you and impacted you by racism. Healing for me is almost like the therapist session. You ever been in a therapist session, right? At first is acknowledging the problem.
Yes.
And I think for many of us in the community, it's a consciousness and an acknowledgement of the problem that I think is the first step in that. And then I think it's really clinical at that point. I think healing requires people who know how to do this, whether it's racial trauma, violence, name all the traumas. It really requires people who are skilled at this to help us unpack that and to help us heal from it. I think now in this heightened consciousness around mental health, we're seeing more Black men use telehealth to engage in community health centers, engage in mental health services. We now need to realize that I always say we proclaim Black don't crack, right? The resilience of our skin, we survive racism, Jim Crow.
I have a whole nother philosophy on resilience, but go ahead, because we'll be here another hour.
But I always say Black don't crack, but the cracking can be on the inside, which means that though we survive all those things,
in the outer appearance,
there's no way in the world that the drive-by shooting isn't a byproduct of the internalized racism, the forced poverty, and the rest of that. So I call it social determinants of violence.
Yes, sir.
So I think the healing starts with us now engaging the mental health system to understand that just like a cold to schizophrenia, there's mild depression, right? I should say cancer to a mild cold. There's schizophrenia to depression.
Yep.
And we need to engage the system to get treatment for that. And some of the conditions we face are a product of the society that we live in.
Last question. What is, with all that you talked about, barriers and systemic structures and things that fight against us, you, others, are working for access to information and resources, things like screenings and whatnot.
Yeah.
What is our responsibility as individuals? I'll talk about our demographic as Black men. Men tend not to go to, Black men even more, probably for a lot of the reasons that you named. What is our responsibility? If we're supposed to be the men and we're, the breadwinner and all this other stuff, and we're this, generally speaking, in that sort of Western United States hood, Black community definition, what's our responsibility to be healthy?
So when you ask me that question, I think about the day Steve Tompkins invited me to come speak to the inmates at the Suffolk County Jail. And jokingly enough, he brought me in and his guards walked me in the room. It was all the inmates. And then they turned and they left and they closed the door.
On purpose.
On purpose. And
Steve will do something.
And
like
I ended up having probably a good hour and a half with them in the room. And one of the things I said, raise your hand if you love yourself. And it was mostly Black men.
And what was
everybody hesitated to raise their hand. And I said, you know what? You can tell when someone doesn't love themselves because you don't get out of the car on the way to the drive-by. Because you don't raise your grandkids, because you don't eat right, because you are in an unhealthy relationship in the abuse. And I named all these examples. And I said, the problem is we've been taught to not love ourselves. So I think that the challenge is how do we reclaim our love for ourselves?
Yes, sir.
And then you'll start to see those changes manifest, because now we go back to school. Now we put down the gun. Now we walk away from the conflict.
Yep. Now we're eating healthy.
But we don't love ourselves for a reason. Then we don't come to systems because they haven't been trustworthy, including the healthcare system. So One is the system has to become more trustworthy. That means I got to come to you if I'm a health organization and say, by the way, J. Marion Sims experimented on your ancestors. Annika,
We're going
Lucy,
to
and
acknowledge
Betsy.
that. You said
We're gonna
truth.
acknowledge you.
Truth.
Keeping it
in
real.
the healing. Yep.
Tuskegee syphilis took 800 black men.
Yep.
And half of them were basically not treated for syphilis.
To
and
see
we
what
had a
would
treatment
happen.
syphilis.
Yep.
And by the way, the Institute of Medicine in 2002 came out with a report that says doctors don't treat black and brown people the same. And it wasn't Pookie from the corner. It wasn't a Nation of Islam brother.
Walking in a suit.
It was the Institute of Medicine government sanctioned report that validated what people have been saying for centuries. So how do we take all of that collective history and consciousness and truth and then say, I know you don't trust me, but I want to regain your trust. And I'm going to come to your neighborhood. I'm going to come to your community center, your church. I'm going to chat with you on the street corner. I'm going to get you in for the clinical trial so we can treat your cancer. I'm going to get you in for the screening so I can get your prostate cancer before it's a death sentence. We don't do that. We wait for you to start to trust us.
Yeah.
Instead of coming to you.
And by that time, if you get the screening, you're screened into anywhere from a stage 2, 3, 4.
Exactly.
And that's not even counting the delay in screenings that took place because folks weren't going to the doctor.
It's called deferred care. Deferred care. So that means whatever the health disparities were before COVID, now you didn't come in and get your teeth checked, your eyes checked, your mental health checked, your substance disorder treated, and that pain in your side could be stage 4 instead of a stage 1. This health disparity crisis we're in, we haven't even started to talk about what it's going to look like in 3 to 5 years.
I mean, I've said you said what I've been saying, that we haven't seen the full impact of COVID emotionally on our young people,
Absolutely.
academics, and whatnot. So, Attorney Curry, we have a couple of folks out waiting. I appreciate you. I appreciate all the advocacy. I was told that. Don't start. I was told that the folks that put this together was, like Mike said, you need to be in the building. And so I appreciate just the support, man, even though it took 3 years.
But you're like our Roland Martin. You're like our local Roland Martin. So that's why I told him that you got to be on the spot. So
I know Roland. We've served on the panel together back when I was with Department of Labor, HHS, some years ago. And to be compared to Roland, who will be here in a couple of weeks, right?
I think he will, actually, with the
convention.
Yeah, the convention.
So while I have you here, what can you talk about the convention for 2 seconds?
I'm a national board member, but I am not the Boston branch president. Tanisha.
I just mean national, because the national convention is coming. Can you say anything?
I'll give you the broad. There'll be 5,000 to 7,000, mostly black folks, converging on Boston, and it's gonna make people feel uncomfortable because if 20 of us go to Newberry Street, people start to ask, where y'all from? What's going on? There's gonna be 5,000 to 7,000 of us here, and they're gonna learn a lot about history here. William Monroe Trotter led 10,000 people in downtown Boston in 1915 to protest Birth of a Nation. 10,000 black folks marched down Tremont Street. The first NAACP branch in the country that was chartered was in 1911 at Park Street Church here in Boston. Phyllis Wheatley, Du Bois, Frederick Douglass in New Bedford, and
who does Dr. Cornell Williams said that I remind him of? That was it Trotter? Who had the Emancipator? Was it Trotter?
It was Trotter. It was Trotter. Yep,
Trotter. So, and he was the former national president.
And William Lloyd Garrison, from a white abolitionist perspective, a white advocate. James Reeb was the white Unitarian Universalist minister who answered Dr. King's call, went to Selma, and was murdered in Selma. There's too much history here. And though we have history of busing and a history of racial segregation and violence,
that's such a deficit-based sort of informing, which perpetuates a narrative, of negativity versus people like Dart Adams and whatnot that ensures that we know the history, the contributions. There were stuff being done that before the Revolutionary War, Civil War was even started, that was being done here in Massachusetts. We were a leader.
Absolutely.
And so even from back then,
I got to give you one nugget before I leave. Crispus Attucks.
Yes.
And I do this presentation, Crispus Attucks, as we know, first man killed at the American Revolution, one of those 5 men that were murdered. Most people know that history. It's one of the few paragraphs we got in our history books about African Americans: Rosa Parks, Dr. King, Crispus Attucks. Most people don't know that Crispus Attucks, African American, was 6'2". The average height of men at that time was 5'6", 5'8". Most people don't know that John Adams defended the British soldiers who would become President Adams. defended the British
Thomas
soldiers
Arthur. Yep.
in the case against for the murdering of those 5 men.
Yep.
In the transcript, if you watch it, if you read it, he argues the same arguments they argued in Tamir Rice and George Floyd.
Yep.
They argued that his size was the justification for killing that African American in the American Revolution, right? That gave birth to the American Revolution. So we have a recurrence in our history of narratives about Black people that go back that far, but of course, go back to
And
slavery,
still being perpetuated.
and we still perpetuate it. I think we now are at a critical point where the truth now has to catch up to history.
Yes.
We got to have those hard conversations. They don't want to have them in Florida, but we can have them here.
Yep. That
people are going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to make them rethink about who's not in the room and why, who's
And who
dying and why, who's not as educated and why. The only last thing I'll say from a healthcare perspective is I always say that there's a little Black girl in Roxbury meant to find a cure for cancer. If we understand that white supremacy is real, and if you believe that, then you believe a certain demographic of people were meant to do all these great things. That was always a crock of, and I can't swear on your show.
You can,
but
it's not after dark. A crock of caca.
A crock, whatever. However, but I say there's a little Black girl, like a Kizzmekia Corbett, who was on the team to find the Moderna vaccine, that could be saving all of our lives, but she doesn't have the academic rigor. She's afraid to stay after school because she has to walk home because of the violence in the neighborhood, because her teacher has self-fulfilling prophecy and talks to her in a way that makes her not be the person she should be, because she doesn't get into that STEM program, or because she's in a residency program like so many Black men and women, and they get derailed because the folks that they're reporting to don't believe that they can be that brain surgeon or that researcher. It is rampant. The research is there. The data is showing us is this. Truth catching up to history.
Yes.
Now what do we do with it?
That's my point, because we have all this data. And again, you and I can be here for another hour.
So I'm making up for all the times I didn't come on the show.
You're good.
Appreciate
You're
you,
good,
man.
sir.
And you did your thing at the Embrace unveiling. When I tell you I was proud of you, man, the choir was phenomenal.
We're singing tomorrow.
Oh, you are singing tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, I'll be there.
Singing again tomorrow.
I'll be there.
I appreciate you,
Okay.
brother Mike.
You
We
got
have
Audrey
some other
Shelton.
folks. Yes, she's getting ready to come in. She's been very patient. You let her know that the reason we took so long
I
is
was running
because,
my mouth.
yes, and you can leave us the mic so it won't be a hot mic. Folks, we are very impromptu today. We just had Michael Curry from the League of Massachusetts Community Health Centers. Audrey is getting ready to come in from Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation, and I believe that we're going to do that. She will come in a couple of seconds. We're very impromptu this morning. This is it afternoon. We're very impromptu this afternoon, but this is basically, take your time. This is basically folks coming together. Yeah, absolutely. Folks coming together from the industry, healthcare providers, policymakers, funders, to talk about health equity. So that's what we're here reporting about this afternoon. Just a few notes for you. Oh my goodness, you all are really going in on these comments. Mike definitely preached, as he always does. Good to see Mama Java in the room. Who else? Asia, good to see you in the room. Boston Latin Academy. Yes, you all can celebrate your alumni that's in the room. We are also going to chat, I believe, right after we chat with the president of the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation. We're also going to chat with, I just forgot that quick. We're going to chat with a few people. So we're in the background here. I believe Nicole Olby may come, or somebody from BECMA, but Dr. Ojukutu, yes, I'm Dr. B. We're going to get her to come as well. We got folks that, shout out to everybody from Castle that's helping out and keeping me in check this morning. Dylan. But keep in mind also, over the next, Dr. Thea James just walked by. If we could grab her too, whoever, like all these wonderful people. We are very impromptu. Welcome, Audrey. Thank you so much for being with us today. I just would be remiss that I did not say that there's someone standing behind the camera that I have known for many, I don't want to get in trouble, for some time, and was very instrumental in a lot of the spaces that we moved in when I was with Mayor Menino at the city of Boston, Maya Brofield, who is Brodyfield. I got it right. That's right. I remember. Who was at the Health Commission with Dr. Barbara Ferrer. So if you've been in healthcare or health equity for over 10, 15, maybe 20 years or so, you definitely recognize that name, but also recognize her name as a leader out in California during COVID. But we have someone here that I've had inadvertently some engagement with on social media from the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation. Audrey, please introduce yourself and say hello to folks.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Audrey Shelto. I'm the president of the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts Foundation. I've been there for 10 years. Absolutely love it.
Absolutely.
Work on great things.
And one of the great things that you're involved with and working on today is are you a part of or supportive of the Health Equity Compact? We're here for the summit today, but tell us about your understanding or role in the Health Equity
Sure.
Compact.
I have, I can say many of my friends are part of the Health Equity Compact.
Okay.
I am not, as a white woman, part of the Health
Okay.
Equity Compact. But on this project, we got together early on, Michael Curry and I,
Yes.
who I know you were just speaking
Yeah.
with, and talked about the fact that while we hoped that the fact that people of color were getting sicker, staying sicker, dying earlier would be enough to get people to want to focus on eliminating health disparities and health equities.
You would think
maybe
Yes.
that would
Yep.
be enough. Life and death, you might think that was enough, but it clearly isn't
Mm.
enough to get us moving as far as we need to go and as fast as we need to go.
Okay.
So we talked about, well, what did we do the last time we had a big movement in Massachusetts?
Mhm.
And we thought about what we did with health reform.
Yes,
And we tried
yes,
when we aimed for
exactly.
getting universal
And we
coverage.
set a national model for that.
Exactly. And we said, well, maybe we need to follow that process and do sort of a business case. So for people who aren't moved by the tragedy
You
associated
make
with
the
health
money make
disparities,
sense.
let's give them the money argument, and maybe that will get their attention.
It's interesting that it comes down to sort of capitalism, because when you talk about healthcare, there is actually a component. There is a business component. The hospitals have to pay the doctors and the nurses. They have to buy supplies. But that piece about, making it make sense with the money, do you feel that has had the inroad and the influence that you would like for it to have to bring about this level of equity?
Yep.
Where do you think that is?
So, well, I think I think today's a really important day.
Yep.
And I think today could be pretty pivotal.
Yep.
Um,
Pivotal, yep,
pivotal,
yep.
pivotal, right? Pivotal. The panel before I spoke, and before I introduced the report, it was a group of healthcare leaders, right? People who run hospitals and run health plans.
Yep.
And they got to the point that they recognized that a business case needed to be made. That
Yes.
they, even as running healthcare systems, needed to recognize that this is about healthcare safety, it's about quality, it's about people being healthier, but it's also about the business case, that if people are healthier, if people are not dying early, if people are not out of work because they're sick, then the economy is going to do better and all of our businesses are going to do better.
And they sort of play off of each other, because we understand not just in environmental services, not just the phlebotomists and the medical assistants, but a lot of the healthcare industry employees happen to be BIPOC people of color.
Absolutely.
And so it's, I won't say cyclical, but it just, forget a big word, it just makes sense to invest in humanity and invest in healthcare. Talking about investments, what is Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation doing? I see tweets come up. I've had some interactions with Blue Cross Blue Shield from 2020 and 2021. What do you guys like? What are your priorities for this year? What are you working on? What can we look forward to?
So we are also separately, we have given grants to the compact to help them do their work.
Yep.
But more broadly, I'd say, we're 20 years old now. The foundation's been around for 20 years, and we funded a lot of work in the early years around cultural competency, helping organizations who want to get training on that, working on disparities, big grants over several years with that. But more recently, we went out into the community. And we asked through, not even through us, but through community groups, we asked them to convene other community groups of color, and organizations that are led by people of color, as well as serving people of color, and said, what role do you think the foundation could have in trying to address these issues? Because we can keep giving out grants, and
that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. But what came back loud and clear is we need capacity building. We need people of color to be at the tables when these big discussions and big decisions are being made about healthcare access, healthcare quality, healthcare disparities. And that's not really the case right now. I mean, if you think about it, or if you look even historically at these, big elaborate, celebrations and photographs of this, you don't see too many people of color.
I don't have.
So-
Oh, I have a little bit of my coffee to take a sip.
So what they said to us was, we've got a lot of really strong advocacy organizations that focus on environmental justice or
The
justice
social
for people
determinants.
coming
Yes,
out of
yep, yep.
out of incarceration and reentry, around housing, reuniting dads with their kids. La Collaborativa, Green Roots, like Living Legacies, all sorts of great organizations, but they're not in the healthcare space. We also have great healthcare advocacy organizations, if you know many of them, but most of them are not led by people of color. So we said, okay, let's invest money in supporting these organizations that are run by people of color
Yep.
to make the contacts, do the
Okay.
networking, get the
Ex-
skills they feel they need
Mhm.
so that they can get at those tables and be there when, as Daryl Gaskin, one of the authors said, so that there's nothing about them without them.
And
Speaking as a
that's
white
sort of
woman.
that old school thing of, FUBU, for us, by us. The fact that someone at your level, as the president of the foundation, is able to sit here, and I know when grants and stuff go out, from being in government, a list goes up and but the fact that you're able to just, they clearly roll off, that talks about your knowledge base of the work that's going on. And sometimes at this level, you don't get the privilege of knowing the impact of the day-to-day of what the money that you're putting out there. And so that speaks just to the work of the organizations. What do you hope comes, finally, our last question, where do you see health equity here in Massachusetts a year from now in the context of working with the compact?
I think,
where would you like to see it?
Sure. I think the foundation, our foundation, and the compact, and other groups of payers, providers, people with lived experience, government officials, we need to come together and think about. Again, Daryl mentioned this in Baltimore and in Maryland. We know we don't need any more data about all the disparities. We know the disparities
you're
exist.
going to get folks in trouble.
We know that there are disparities and inequities and structural racism in housing, in criminal justice, in education. So we need to get together, not even just with a healthcare lens, but say, in this community, what is this community concerned about?
Yep.
And what do we need to do to provide the different levels of support? Because we're all coming from different perspectives to try to address this really complex issue. So it's working with the compact, but I think Michael would agree, it's also extending beyond the healthcare system to say, we know what we need to do here. We just need the political will and the collaboration and the perseverance, because it doesn't come easy to get it done.
So I just whispered over to Maya that I love Audrey. I love how you said providers, payers, and you didn't say just people, but those 3 Ps: providers, payers, and people. People maybe being the foundation of that. I love that. But I just love how you talk about that we don't need any more data. I kind of share that sentiment because we get caught up in the collection, making sure, and it's right, making sure that it's diverse and it's balanced. But then we're 2 years out, and it's going to tell us stuff that 85% of what we know is not really going to change. 15% to update and consider current life experience.
Around the edges.
Yeah, exactly.
Around
But
the
this
edges,
hold up in 3 years in some legislative areas, going to conference, going to committee for. Audrey, it was a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you today, and I hope we can figure out how to do something together, because it really is important, not just the providers, people, and payers, but this platform is dedicated to sharing information and getting resources out there to communities that typically aren't aware of it. We have a whole segment called Your Healthy Java. So
great.
I really appreciate, and thank you for your patience, because Michael started, your friend.
When Michael starts,
just let him go.
I sit down and wait.
Okay. All right. I really appreciate
Thank you so much. It was great
and
speaking
Maya,
with you.
thank you. Not on camera, but Maya and I go way back. And so if you're from the Health Commission some years ago, you remember Maya Brodyfield. Thank you, Audrey. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for everything. Everyone, that was just Audrey from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we, I think, are having Dr. Ojakutu come in. I'm not exactly sure, but we'll find out in a couple of seconds. And I think she is out there. Oh, not yet. Okay. So we're impromptu and working on this. But speaking of health equity, don't forget, for the Boston Waterfront Coalition, next Wednesday, y'all. Is it next Wednesday? June 21st? Next Wednesday, June 21st, we are going to be on Carson Beach for the Java with Jimmy Community Day and Cookout over at Moakley Park. So that's taking place, and we talk about, exercise and health equity. Come out to the beach, walk around, free food. Food trucks will be there. We'll have wellness providers, music, DJ, giveaways. So that's going on next Wednesday. Don't forget, tomorrow night at 5 p.m., tune in to WGBH/GBH News at 5 p.m. Yours truly will be doing the first Java with Jimmy at GBH. If any of you are out in Brighton from tomorrow from 11 to 7 and just happen to ride past the big GBH billboard, please take a picture for your brother, because I'm not going to be able to go by there because I'm going to be at the Embrace Boston event. Don't forget, tomorrow at 9 a.m., we have Mayor Michelle Wu. And then at about 11:30 a.m., turn into NBC, because the Voices of Embrace Choir will be singing. And I think that is it. We may come back. It's 12:21. We may come back for another quick impromptu check-in. But please be sure to Google Health Equity Compact. Sign up for their newsletter. Be informed. Dr. Alabre talks about your healthcare matters. We need to make our healthcare an absolute priority as human beings. We need to make it a priority as Black and brown folks. And men, if you're listening, you need to make it a priority as well. So with that being said, we're going to wrap up for today. And we may come back, but if not, we will see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. live from Boston Common. Don't ask, with Mayor Michelle Wu at 9, and then tune into NBC about 11:20 or so. Well, tune in for the whole event tomorrow at 10:30. The Embrace Boston Juneteenth concert starting at 10:30 tomorrow on NBC Boston, correct? NBC 10 Boston. Thank God for the Castle Group that's in here holding the brother down. Shout out to Sandy and the whole team, and Dylan and Nate and Brittany. So they're holding us down here. And again, thank you to Michael, Akila, and everyone that just ensured. Nicole Obi, we're going to try to get her to come from BECMA as well. But we talk about health equity all the time in the Java Cafe. So today we just happen to be on location with all these great people, payers, and providers, and policymakers. And so thank you all for tuning in. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. live with Mayor Wu. Thank you.